Hello, my name is Stefan, and I'll be talking about how we can deploy an application onto AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So, Elastic Beanstalk is also a platform as a service, as it provides you as a service to deploy your application, and it does hide some of the complexity of running infrastructure needed to run your application. So, we got Lightcell, which is on the lower end of the complexity because it's quite easy. It does hide and it does abstract much of the complex configurations needed to run uh, a web server. But it is much Elastic Beanstalk is much more easier compared to actually handling the infrastructure, such as creating EC2 instances, load balancers, autoscalers, and all of that. So it does help you to create a very highly available infrastructure using Elastic Beanstalk. And so we're gonna talk about what are some of the advantages. These are some of the recent environments that I created, so let's just ignore that. But for every uh, let me just delete this because this is one of my. This probably should be deleted. No. So basically, you can create an application. An application is just a name, and you can have multiple environments under each application. So let me just delete that. And yeah, it's being deleted. Might take some time. Yeah, while it's been done, so basically an application can have multiple environments. So you can have a testing environment, you can have a production environment for each application, and also like the fact that you can have different version of the applications, such as deploying and uploading it into that environment, which promotes continuous development. So we're going to create an application. We'll call it create application. There's another way to do it as well, which is the launch wizard, but this is just a step. We'll call this the Next.js application, and we'll say this is a application used to run our Next.js application. Or maybe this is a Next.js application created by Stefan. And then you can either have a tag, but we're not going to associate a tag with that application. That's helpful for resource management. And then it's going to directly prompt you to the application, and then you can create an environment. So you can have multiple environments. And so we're going to create a web server environment. There's also a work environment, very similar to how we saw ECS having service and task. And then we can have an environment name. So we'll call this the debugging. We'll call it the debugging Next.js. So it's just showing that this is a debugging environment for the Next.js application. We can define our own URL, which is basically to access this environment, and we need to make sure that we check the availability, or you can leave it blank and it'll automatically generate one. So we'll call this debugger Next.js and see whether it's available. It looks like it's available, and we'll call this is the debugging stage for our Next.js application. And then we're going to go with manage. So this basically installs Node.js. What Elastic Beanstalk does is it'll take our application, it'll automatically install Node.js, and it automatically runs npm install, which will install all the dependencies, all the modules, the node modules needed for our application, and it'll automatically run npm start. So we got the version, we got Node.js, we got all this stuff, and then we're going to use our existing code. We're not going to go with existing version because it's one of the old. If you have another application, you can obviously use that. We're going to upload a new one. We'll call this version and 1, and we'll call this local, and we can also get the public S3 bucket URL for that object, but we're just going to directly upload it, which eventually uses an S3 bucket. So we're going to choose the file, and I'm just going to show you the structure of the file because I had to make some changes, very minor changes. So when you go to your package.json file, you have to change this to next start and run it on port 8080. The reason is that this is the default Nginx port that it listens to. So Nginx is like almost like a load balancer, but that runs on your web server, and it directs different traffic. It listens to port 80 by default, all HTTP requests, and it directs traffic based on what you need. So it's almost like a load balancer that's running locally. And so there's Apache and there's Nginx as well, but we're going to be using Nginx. And that's pretty much it. You have to make sure that you build the package. You can run these steps like npm run, npm run build, and then you can test it out before. And then once you're done with that, you need to compile, you need to zip all these files except node modules, because we are going to be running npm install, or Elastic Beanstalk is going to run npm install by default. So we're not going to need the node modules, but we need everything except node modules, and then you compress it to make a zip file. And then once you're done with that, you should be able to just upload your zip file here. Let's just put pages, and we'll go with highly availability. So they give you the option of going with just highly availability and just going with spot instances or on-demand instances. Well, we call this a spot fleet, as it's a combination of both spot and on-demand. You can also go with single based on your application if you just want to keep the cost low, and if you don't mind it losing progress or being interrupted if one availability zone goes down. So we'll choose an existing service role. We'll go with this web server. This will give us an IAM role that we need to attach to the EC2 instance that allows us to SSH into the thing, and then in the SSH into the EC2 instance. So this basically will provision all the infrastructure needed. We can actually check it out directly using the EC2 dashboard, and it'll show us the infrastructure that's running. It's almost like how CloudFormation runs a stack, and then when you delete all the stack, it'll delete all the resources associated with the stack. So similarly, Elastic Beanstalk uses CloudFormation to run a stack of resources needed. So we're going to run this on default VPC, assign a public IP. We want it to run in the public subnets, and we don't have a database. You could potentially use a database, but if you do use a database, you have to make sure to configure the password engine, like whether it's MySQL and other necessary configuration. Then we're going to also, let's go to the next one. It's going to allow us to choose a root volume. So you can either choose an EBS if you have an existing EBS storage, or if you want to go with the default, it depends on your requirement. Then you're gonna go with the default security group. We should open port 80. By default, Elastic Beanstalk is going to create a EC2 security group, so you don't really need a security group, to be honest, because Elastic Beanstalk they will create a security group for us and it'll attach. But if you do this, it'll just attach this security group on top of the newly created security group. So we don't want that. We're just going to keep it simple, and let's do load balanced. We'll have autoscaler to make sure it's highly available. So you can hypothetically run 4 max between 2 availability zones. So we have a load balancer to distribute stuff. This is the fleet composition. So we want on-demand and spot fleets, spot instances. This is talking about the spot allocation, whether you just want to request the lowest priced spot instances or you want other types of strategies. So you can learn more about these different types. Again, these are to make sure that you reduce your cost and you are okay with interruptions. Again, to tell you this is least likely interrupted. One of the disadvantages of spot instances. Again, you could choose a baseline as well if you want to make sure that there's only one there's like a certain number of on-demand instances running for the baseline. You can always set that, so you can set it here. But if you don't set it out, Elastic Beanstalk will figure it out by itself. There is no requirement, but if you do have one, you can just make sure you always run one on demand, and anything about that is decided by Elastic Beanstalk, and it's done by spot instances. And then you have capital rebalancing, and then you have different types of instances. Again, this is using a priority based on the scaling out instances, whether you want to add resources. You want to make sure that you get this first, the T3 micro instance, and then the next priority is T3 small, and you can choose the instance you want your EC2 instances to be, especially for your spot instances. And this AMI ID is actually not the default AWS Linux 2023. This is using Elastic Beanstalk modded Linux. Basically, it has the Elastic Beanstalk software that's installed, which helps us to do everything. That's why it's already autofill for us. Then we have the scaling triggers, very similar to target policies, target tracking policies. But in this case, they're just trying to make sure that the percentage or any of the stats remain between a certain level. So we're going to keep it between 70% and 60%. Scale up increments, meaning like the steps needed when you're trying to improve or increase or scale out or scale in. You want to increase it 1 by 1, but you can change it to 2 by 2. But there's the issue that if you do increase this, it might cause it to continuously fluctuate. But if you put two or more, it might reach, or it might be able to respond to high demands much more quickly. Again, it does matter. It does matter what the application performs. Again, shows the load balances. You want it to direct traffic to the 2 public subnets, and we can either have a dedicated for our environment. So we can have, but by default, you need to create a new load balancer for your application. So if you haven't, this won't work. But say, for example, your application already has a testing load balancer and you just want to share it, you could just potentially use the same load balancers, because a load balancer is considered horizontally scaling as it's AWS managed. So it won't cause any performance issues, but it does increase the complexity a bit. But we're just going to go with dedicated because we're going to have only one environment. It'll go with the default listeners, port 80. You could, it's a bit buggy, I think. Probably, yeah. And you could also add a HTTPS, adding a very similar to how we did before. We need to first request a certificate from ACM. We need to do that manually, and then we can add the 443 and then do the pointing to the target group, and 80 redirects traffic to the HTTPS. Very similar to how we did before. We don't need to log. Again, depends on what our application needs. And then we're gonna go, I think, to the final page. It's mostly to do with monitoring. Yeah, so we can either have enhanced. Again, enhanced does cost us. Basic, I don't think it costs us anything, but enhanced is much more detailed, high resolution, which means, I mean, the resolution I think is quite the same, but the sensitivity is going to be higher because it does every second or something. And also you have different metrics that you can choose. Much more greater control, but we'll keep it basic. You can also have a managed updates. Again, this is promoting continuous development. You can also have an email notification. This is quite important because we want it to be, it depends on what's the default update. So for example, you have an application that's installed already deployed, but now you need to issue or push a new software or a new update. You want to change something. So you can either do rolling, which means it's going to do slowly by slowly, and it does tell you a percentage. you want to make sure part of the program, or like only one or two instances will get the new application, and you don't want others to get the application yet. So this is probably because you want to minimize the risk, because especially when you're deploying a new app, there can be bugs, and you want to minimize the exposure. But I would probably go with all at once, because it's quite simple. All the instances get the new application uh, without any delay. And we can forget about this stuff, deactivate. All these are checks. And this is what I was talking about, the Nginx server, which is like a proxy server, we call that. Very similar to how a load balancer works. Actually, you could hypothetically run an EC2 instance as a load balancer and direct traffic to your backend EC2 instances, and that's going to be using Nginx as well. But we're not going to use that. We're just going to use Nginx locally, just to direct or point traffic for simple tasks. We also have other features like X-ray to monitor and optimize. And then we are going to, that's pretty much it. It's going to upload the file. We'll go to our review file. It's probably going to go to our review file. It has all our documentation, all the configuration set, and we are going to do submit. So again, these are key things that you need to remember. You need to make sure your package.json has the correct port. If you don't do that, you could actually set a different port, because by default npm start, and if you just had next start without this p8080, it would by default run on port 3000. That's the default port. And you can actually configure Nginx to direct traffic from port 80 to 3000, but you need to add an either code SSH into the EC2 instance and change it, or you can do a thing called EBS file extension EBS file extensions. So basically, it's a folder that we create called EBS file extensions, and then we have configuration files that let's just see one example. Hopefully there's going to be an example. They're different. You could definitely research it on how to point. You can update permissions. You can run commands. It's basically Elastic Beanstalk runs that file. Before it actually, while it's deploying the application, or when you're rolling the new updates. So those are things that you can let me just show you an example. So it's supposed to be like this. You can create any server configuration and config file. You might have to research on what's included in this, but I don't have one right now. But it's just basically you can configure how what commands you need to run, and if you want to create a file, especially when it comes to Nginx, you might have to modify some things automatically to point to 3000. So we're gonna wait until this is ready. It's going to show you a set of events showing that it's creating all the required infrastructure. Remember that you don't actually have to manually adjust these infrastructures. Say, for example, you want to delete this, all the resources, you can just delete the application itself instead of actually deleting the autoscale group, which can be quite hard because you don't have to do everything. It's like a stack. You need to manage. You can manage your stack here in Elastic Beanstalk. And let's wait until that's ready. It does take some time, and then once you're ready, you should be able to access the website using this link provided. And yeah, we don't have the SSH, but Yeah, probably the app is still running. Yeah, when you get the 502 bad gateway, this means that the application is not working and probably it's not deployed yet. It does take some time. And you also have like other configurations, like you can check the health. They have this is just the basic one. They also have the enhanced health. You have logs. I think we disable that as well. Probably it does only give you the 100 lines, but if you want more than that, you need to define a S3 bucket. They have monitoring services, alarms like we did, managed updates. Basically means that if you upload a new application, which I'm going to show you a bit, just to brief you, and we'll wait until this is done. And that's pretty much it when it comes to Elastic Beanstalk, because everything's pretty much hidden. You need to know you have an application, you might have environments. There's a thing called environmental swapping, and I'm gonna just tell you, because if you want to just swap, like say for example you want to change the URL, say for example this environment wants to be now production, you can just swap it. And that's one thing. So there are different features, like if you want to upgrade this environment to a production server, you can change the URL to another environment and it's just going to swap, and it's an easy swap. That's what you call the swap environment. And we also have the rebuild, which is basically not the same as deploying the app, but also rebuilding the whole infrastructure itself. And they also have the restart app servers, which is basically restarting the instances. You can terminate the environment. Your restoring environment is only possible if you delete the application and it's there. Sometimes it might not be there. It only stays there for a while, the recent environments. So if you're lucky, you would be able to restore your environments. And that's pretty much it. It says it's deployed successfully. We don't need to wait until this becomes green. We should be able to access it. Yeah, so this is the website. The website's working. Let's see if this is a server-side rendered application. Looks like it's a server-side application. Yes, everything's processed before coming. And that's pretty much it. It's a simple Next.js application hosted on Elastic Beanstalk, actually using Elastic Beanstalk that leverages AWS services. And I hope this helps. Actually, before that, let me just show you how you upload a new application. So for example, let's say I made a new change, I did some changes, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to zip the file again, and I'm just going to upload this again. So they have a thing called version label. So we call this version 1, and then I can call this version 2, like that. And you have the thing called rolling, which I discussed. If you want it to be in all instances, or if you want to be deployed on like part of the, like just a few instances. Again, this is only if you have many instances, and you can do other checks. And that's pretty much it when it comes. So again, when you do that, it's going to deploy, but this would really not be useful when it's just one instance. That's why you should always use all at once. And that's pretty much it when it comes to deploying an application using AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Hope this helps. Thank you.